Hi, David. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm great. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but hopefully now things will be okay. So let's just start with you telling everyone what you do, your background, and how you got into remote viewing.
Sure. So I'm a remote viewer, amongst other things. But my background is not in psychic woo-woo mystery things at all. I was in 2019. I was a software engineer. My background's in like software engineering, life sciences, archaeology, and I was a normal, conventional Western materialist kind of mindset, right? And I had a spontaneous spiritual awakening and had absolutely no idea what had happened because I had no background in any kind of religion or spirituality or anything. And I knew at the time that a cat was out of the bag and I had to go and investigate this, but I had no idea what it was, and couldn't even put words to my experience. So, because I came from that pretty scientific background, my approach then was like empirical. It was, I've got to find an experiment that I can run that is going to help me to investigate whatever this weird stuff is that I kind of ignored until now, and now I've been forced to come into contact with. So remote viewing, let me just disambiguate the term remote viewing, right? Because it means different things to different people. But the term comes from the US military's declassified psychic spying program. It was actually coined a couple of years before that research effort kicked off. But fundamentally, remote viewing is not like some kind of psychic modality, right? It's not a way of perceiving. Remote viewing actually refers to the laboratory protocol, which is designed to gather good quality evidence that non-local perception has taken place. And it's actually super simple. So it's a 4-step protocol. Um, First of all, it's it's a protocol which wraps around psychic perception or non-local perception or whatever you want to call it, non-local awareness, consciousness, that kind of thing. But it doesn't tell you how to do it, right? It's not giving you a
Hello?
method. It's not saying you've got to close your eyes or open your eyes or go into trance or do this or do that. It's just the experimental rules under which you gather the data. So first of all, there is a specific thing, and it's your job as the remote viewer, as the viewer, to describe that thing. That thing is called your target. And in the military days, that would be written on a bit of paper and sealed into an envelope. Because the second rule is you're blind to the target. You are not given any information about what it is you're supposed to describe. So that prevents your imagination or your foreknowledge or your kind of suppositions or assumptions or bias or whatever coming into it. So if you get to the end of this process and you describe the target really well, then it can only be because non-local data transfer took place, right? So it excludes cheating, essentially. And while you're blind to the target, you do your session, whatever method you're going to use, you perceive the thing somehow, and you make a record of your perceptions. Usually that's just written on paper, but you could use a voice recorder or video yourself using a whiteboard or do whatever, right? So long as you can write a nice summary for your client or the analyst or the project manager or whatever. Your job is to translate this into English, right? Not to give somebody a pile of tarot cards or chicken guts or something and say, you can interpret this however you like, right? This is a descended from a military intelligence technique. So there isn't room for vague hand waving. So you produce your session, you produce your summary, you turn it in, and then the final part of the protocol is you get feedback. You find out what it was that you were supposed to describe. So when you're training, when you're learning how to do this, that's going to be something that we know all about, right? It's just going to be a photograph of a roller coaster or a mountain or a wave in the ocean or a tiger or something like that, right? Where you can tell all the information you need and you can go through the work that you've produced and say, oh, I was really accurate here and I wasn't so accurate there. What was I doing when it was working? And then what happened to throw me off? So you can kind of use it as a introspective process to refine what you're doing. Then when you're doing operational work, when you're investigating things which are genuinely unknown, then your feedback is going to be, oh, tell us the answer to this question. And we don't know the answer to that question. That's why we're tasking remote viewers to get it, right? So sometimes it's a matter of you've got to wait and see what happens because you might be using remote viewing to predict the outcome of a sports game, or predict, is this share going to go up or down in price next month, or what's going to happen in the news next month, or how do we fix this problem with our product,
Mm-hmm.
or is this person a corporate spy? Should we hire them? That kind of thing. There's a sort of wait and see aspect with the operational remote viewing, but
Mm-hmm.
the feedback is really important for learning, and it's an important part of the protocol. But the actual process of being psychic doesn't depend on that. Okay, so what we're doing is not looking forward into the future at what someone will tell us after the experiment. And we can demonstrate this by doing experiments where we show that this phenomena works and it produces accurate information, even if you don't give them feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, this protocol is not how to be psychic or what to do. This is just like the system of blinding and specific targeting that we work within. So in practical terms, what this means is it excludes spontaneous experiences. So a lot of people will have had an experience like a precognitive dream where they kind of dream something really vivid, maybe an accident or a disaster or some terrible thing, or perhaps something really mundane. And then they go about their day and this thing happens on the news or they see it in their daily life and it's like, oh my God, my dreams became real, That's a surprisingly common experience. But it's not remote viewing because you didn't meet that first part of the protocol where there is a specific target, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's precognition, it's non-local awareness of some sort, but it's not remote viewing because you didn't have a specific target to which you were blind,
Mm-hmm.
perceive the thing, record your perceptions, and get feedback. Okay. So yeah, within that, you can, I always say to people to be a bit facetious, you can read tarot cards if you want. You can do I Ching, you can read chicken entrails, tea leaves, do what you like, right? As long as you can write me a summary in English or whatever language, then it doesn't really matter what method you use.
Right, right. You mentioned that you had some sort of experience, like a psychic experience that sort of launched you into that interest. Can you share what that was?
Sure. I mean, it wasn't a psychic experience. It was um, maybe not even an altered state of consciousness. It was a kind of unusual event, an unusual state of consciousness, but it was a short-lived event, right? It wasn't, I was in this weird state and I had visions and stuff. It was my actual, what was in my awareness changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost my sense of kind of a local self within time and space. And I think my awareness was like then looking at like the big C consciousness, the unified consciousness of just kind of everything. And then I went, oh my God, wow, what was that? And then it kind of came back into the individual. And I think you might maybe call that experience a cessation, because it's a cessation of the normally persistent illusion of a sense of self and the kind of anchoring of awareness to identity. And the way it came about was pretty funny because are you familiar with the Zen koans, the impossible riddles that they give to the monks to
No,
try and trigger awakening?
no.
So that they're an impossible riddle that they give to monks to try and trigger an awakening. And the way they work, as far as I know, and maybe somebody who's into Zen can leave an angry comment or a peaceful comment about this and say, these are riddles, but there isn't an answer, right? There is no logical way to solve the riddle. And the way to do this practice is to try really, really hard to solve the puzzle. Even though you know that it's impossible, you try to solve it. And eventually you kind of, you crash the left brain. You get like the spinning beach ball or the blue screen of death or something on the whole intellect, identity
Right.
kind of part of the mind. And it goes down for a moment and reboots. And in that gap in between it kind of giving up and returning, the awareness is still there, right? Because the awareness isn't generated by the body. Awareness doesn't come out of cells and nerves and stuff, right? So the awareness is still there, and the awareness perceives, a much grander, broader field of consciousness. Or the language around this stuff is always really difficult. So
Right.
hopefully that gives you the vague idea of what I'm pointing to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that sort of goes into the theories of so-called theories of non-local consciousness, which basically means it's an attempt to explain um, who we are, what is consciousness, and in a way that's not materialist, right? So there are theories that say that consciousness is emergent from the brain and from neurons firing between each other. There's a second theory, it's called non-local consciousness theory, that consciousness is outside of us and we are kind of like a receiver, that we receive it, and like a radio, and consciousness is everywhere. It's like a field. There are different types of different sort of explanations. Of course, it's not proven, right? So there's a lot of skeptics. But what do you think about that? What's your opinion?
I'm definitely in the latter camp.
Mm,
With everything that I've experienced over the last 7 years, there's no way that I would be able to stay a materialist, because
mm,
you would have to do increasingly convoluted intellectual acrobatics to explain all of the experiences which are not
mm,
really compatible with materialism.
mm,
So yeah, I'm definitely an idealist now. I would say consciousness or thought or something like that is the ground of the universe, and the material world, 3D space time, all that stuff is somehow emergent or derivative from that basis of consciousness.
mm,
And you know that consciousness isn't necessarily the bottom, as the burgeoning AI field is discovering. It's really hard to even define what it is, which
mm.
I think is probably because it's impossible to see something from inside it, right? If
Yeah.
his consciousness, right, and you want to look at the outside of it and go, "What's that?" What
Hmm.
tool are you going to use to look at the outside of consciousness? It doesn't even make sense, right? So we're always, I think, going to be in a position where it's a bit tricky to say what is this thing, because we're trying to look at a thing using itself. It's like an eyeball looking at the back of itself. You know, it's just kind of impossible,
Yeah.
by virtue of the nature of the thing, right?
There's another conundrum like that where how do you really know that people you talk to are actually conscious, meaning that they have their own subjective experience? Because you could explain it as everyone you talk to is just a brain that's programmed a certain way to respond to you, talk to you, but it's just sort of like a biological mass, that you interact with. And you might be the
Right.
only person
So
who's conscious.
everybody's an NPC apart from you. That's a
That's an
kind of
interesting
weird.
theory.
That's like a weird version of solipsism, isn't it? A kind of like
So,
materialist solipsism.
right,
Um,
right. I mean, I don't
but I mean,
believe that.
solipsism can't be disproven, right? I don't believe
Yeah,
it either.
that's what
But
I'm talking about. But you
I
can't really disprove that theory.
no.
Yeah.
But can we prove any of this stuff? I think what the best that we can do is we can produce models which are kind of useful for understanding the territory that we're in right now.
Right.
And those models are always going to have limits, right?
Hmm.
If you're, I don't know, say you're developing some kind of medicine, right, for kidneys, you make yourself this really, really cool Excel spreadsheet which models the behavior of a kidney, right? And you can tell it the blood flow and the concentration of different salts, and the genes being expressed and all this stuff, and how big the kidney is and everything, right? And it will tell you how well the thing is working, and what's happening, and how all the things are in balance, and the gradients of salinity and osmotic pressure, and it'll do a really great model of a kidney. But if you need a kidney transplant, that Excel spreadsheet is useless. You can't implant that, right? So the
Hmm.
model is useful up to a point, but it's got limits. And when we
Right.
come up with these, wonderful, great theories of everything, models of consciousness, it's kind of like that, where if you're even going to consider a model, it should be making predictions, right? It should explain what is already here
Hmm.
without running into contradictions. Ideally, it should make some novel, testable predictions. If you want to be rigorous about it, and see if you've got a model which does something that nobody else's does. And if you haven't, what's the point? People come up with these very convoluted theories that are kind of based off their own subjective experience,
Hmm.
which is often subjective experience which is taken literally rather than taken with a big pinch of salt, and I think we need to take subjective experience with a big pinch of salt here, right? Because we're not just experiencing stuff in consciousness, right? If we're having non-local, psychic, spiritual, whatever kind of experiences, part of what we're perceiving is a reflection of ourselves, right? And it's got the content of the unconscious mind, and it's repressed trauma, and it's memories you forgot you had, and it's all kind of random junk which sits in the background of the human mind. And an awful lot of that will shape how you perceive things. I watched this great documentary a couple of days ago that was about John Lilly, the float tank guy, and he came up with this idea. He had a time when he took a lot of drugs in a float tank, and things got very weird for him, as you would expect them to. And he became convinced that there was a thing he called the Earth Coincidence Control Office, I think, Echo, which inspired the Sega game Echo the Dolphin, which is kind of funny. But he was like, oh, there's this committee of aliens and they're controlling things, and that's why I'm having all these synchronicities. And he made this idea in his head, and then that idea colored how he was interacting with the transpersonal stuff that was available to him, right? That became the lens through which he was looking at the universe. And you see that if you look at medieval medieval Christianity, but also occultism, right, where there's a hierarchy, a spiritual hierarchy of archangels and angels and other stuff and demons and humans and all this stuff, and it's like it's a rank order of people who have their given place in the universe. Not people, things, entities, beings that have their given place, and they don't go up, they don't go down, they stay in this fixed hierarchy. And that really mirrors the society at the time, the structure of society. And then you go forward to Lilly, and he's like in the 60s, 50s through the 70s, and he's very involved in the counterculture movement and stuff. But we're still in very like 20th century USA, right? And the academia, he's a medical doctor, he's an academic, is all about committees, right? Committees and officers and subcommittees, and right. So lo and behold, he has this transpersonal experience, and what does he see? More fucking subcommittees, right? Because that's what's in his mind. So that's his lens on, if there's oversight, or if I'm perceiving something and interpreting it to be oversight, where does that come from? A committee, and it's not taking that step to going, well, wait a minute, to what extent am I looking at myself here, and to what extent am I being objective? And it's really impossible to be completely objective in this area. So we got to be careful.
Right. Yeah, sort of mainstream scientific view is still very reluctant about the psi phenomena and parapsychology and the paranormal. I think a big part of it is because it's very hard to explain those phenomena, even though they're extremely common. It's very hard to, or maybe even impossible, to explain them through normal sort of materialistic scientific means. And we have really gotten really far with mainstream science. It has successfully explained almost everything that we interact with in the world. So the fact that we can't explain, remote viewing or telepathy with the same means makes people skeptical. But there's another view, and actually, I was watching an interview with Federico Fagin. I think he's the inventor of a semiconductor. I think I'm correct about it. And he said something quite interesting, that basically it's impossible to, something along those lines, that it's impossible to explain the physical world, the psychic world, let's just call it, in a physical terms, because the physical world is derivative of the wider psychic world. So we just don't have the tools. So it doesn't mean that it's not real. It just means that it's impossible to explain it looking only through the physical, instruments. Yeah. And I think that's,
I would 100% agree with that, for sure.
Yeah, that really struck me. And I think it's true. The question then is, how do we sort of exit that physical paradigm in order to be able to probe and properly really explain, the wider psychic reality? Is that even possible while we're still in this body, or does it only happen when we die, for example?
Well, people have been doing this since there was people. And it would seem that nobody has been able to escape subjectivity. And everybody has always had to use the cultural, symbolic reference points of their time and their culture as a system of metaphor to try to communicate to other people what they've experienced. And that might be in terms of ancestors or spirit animals or guides or angels or demons or deities or whatever, right, as the cast and the characters, and they might appear in a rich and sort of varied landscape of their own, like the stories of the Olympian gods up on Mount Olympus, and that they have their own, the Greek gods and the stuff they get up to is like a soap opera. They have their own mythical landscape, and then there's other cultures where the stuff is more rooted in the physical, right? Where the spiritual and the physical are seen as happening in the same place, and that everything is all together. And neither of those, I think, is necessarily wrong or right. And certainly, I think I've personally had both types of perception, and both are subjective, right? But if there is something out there, right, that we can interact with our mind. We have conscious awareness, and I think that's about all we can be sure of as individuals. Like, we can't disprove solipsism, but we can say, well, I am aware. This I can be certain of. Everything else is a bit suspect, honestly, isn't it? We can't take anything else for granted other than that we ourselves have some kind of awareness, or of at least the illusion of individual consciousness. But we have awareness of that, whether our individuality as an individual being is really an ultimately real thing, which I think probably it isn't, or not. There is an awareness of that with which we identify and go, oh, here I am, right? So that's the only starting point that we've got that we can stand on. And our awareness is the tool that we've got to investigate consciousness. But there isn't a material tool. There isn't a machine that can measure the consciousness waves emanating from the molecules, because, as we've discussed, that's ass backwards. It doesn't make sense and it doesn't work, which is why nobody's ever managed to do it, despite a great deal of effort trying, right?
Right.
We are the tool for this, and yeah, that means it's subjective, and it's very difficult to test. And if you come up with a really good experiment to test it, it will slip out of your hands. We have the trickster effect, as it's known, where there is a ceiling on how good the results that you can get are, and that's really interesting. I think that tells us something interesting about physical reality.
Right. It seems like, really great psychics or people who are successful at remote viewing, and I'm sure you've experienced this, like the degree to which you're successful at the psychic phenomena uh, is correlated with how successful you can get from disattaching yourself from your own body, from your constraints of your brain or frontal lobe, for example, right? So, like, for example, people who had near-death experience and allegedly completely left their body, they come back and they have some psychic gift afterwards, right? So it seems like, people do the sensory deprivation tags and stuff like that. It seems that there is this correlation, or there's something there where the easier it is for you to sort of step outside of your body and the constraints of your brain, the quicker you'll you'll be successful at whatever it is you want to do, telepathy, remote viewing, and stuff like that. Is that, did you find that?
I think there's maybe two parts to that, because we've got the kind of detaching from ourselves somehow, but you can also look at it as a signal to noise ratio problem. So you can either increase the signal or you can decrease the noise. So if we go into a flotation tank, we're decreasing the noise from bodily sensation. We have so little bodily sensation that our awareness kind of lets go of the thing, and we can stop. We're not feeling the breeze on our skin, or the chair beneath our butt, or the light coming into our eyes, or the noises coming into our ears, because that all those different stimuli are taken away. Our awareness can kind of easily pick up quieter signals, if you like, smaller signals, because it's not constantly being drowned out by the physical sensory input. And then you've also got the mental noise, the mental chatter. And I think I would argue that, to some extent at least, this is about training the mind to be disciplined and quiet. And if you want your mind to work really well, your body must be working really well, but you must also be emotionally healthy. So a lot of what drives sort of persistent thought, racing thoughts, or be they sort of normal everyday kind of thoughts, or kind of overthinking, anxiety thing, or sort of negative thoughts or whatever. When the mind is like overactive, it's generating a lot of noise. The radio is picking up a lot of static, and there's different causes to that, many of which are kind of in the body, or maybe related to the body, like the way trauma is stored in the body, in a sense, and the nervous system is kind of continuously in like a fight or flight state, for example. So if you have childhood trauma, the brain is like constantly in a fight or flight state, which shuts down the prefrontal cortex and activates all the the old the lizard brain, the animal brain, right? Which is why it's difficult to pay attention to doing your taxes, because your system is in like run away from a tiger mode. So dealing with things like that is going to reduce the burden of noise. As to leaving the body, or yes, people have near-death experiences, and when they come back, they develop psychic abilities. And they have incredible, the NDEs, veridical NDEs, where somebody's clinically dead, they're measured to be clinically dead for a long time, and then they hear what the surgical team are talking about, and they travel to some distance and overhear family members' conversations, and then they recover in the hospital, and they say to those people, "Did that happen?" And they go, "Yeah, how the hell did you know?" Wow. And this is a really good argument for the fact that the body does not generate consciousness or awareness, or even a sense of self. Right. So, but I think you can also look at the fact that they come back often with a heightened awareness of the non-physical aspect of consciousness, as damage, right? As the body being kind of a system within which the consciousness kind of like a fishbowl, the consciousness gets stuck and has to swim around inside the body. But it's I think it's probably supposed to be like that, right? Because if you take away the illusion, you spoil it, and it can no longer fulfill its function, right? If you snap your fingers and everybody became enlightened right now, everybody attained enlightenment, the world would collapse, civilization would collapse, the farmers wouldn't harvest the food, people wouldn't turn up to work in the supermarkets to sell it, the truck drivers wouldn't drive their trucks, right? Everybody would starve, and nobody would care. right? So, in order for us to be exploring consciousness through the lens of this physical experience, right, we kind of have to have limits on it, which I
Mm-hmm.
think ultimately explains the trickster effect. It explains the limit on how good the results you can get in a psi experiment. And you can prove psi, like non-local awareness is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you look at the pile of good quality scientific laboratory studies, it's proven, right? It's not controversial. And if you believe otherwise, it's because you haven't honestly looked at the evidence. You've assumed that all the evidence is invalid because it contradicts your pre-existing beliefs, and therefore you haven't looked at it, right? Which is understandable. That was definitely been the position I used to take, but I'm not able to take that position anymore. So, yeah, you can't fuck up the matrix for everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we find this when we try and use remote viewing to make money. Yes, we can do it, but we cannot win the $100 million Powerball mega jackpot, right?
Why
Because
do you think that
that
is? What's the? What do you think?
I
Yeah,
think it's too
guess the
disruptive.
numbers.
Yeah, I don't think the limit is psychic ability. I think the limit is the extent to which it's possible for us to screw up the illusion for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the phrase consensus reality, or this idea of co-creation between everybody sort of contributing to somehow manifesting the world as it is, and there have been really cool experiments with mass meditations for peace, where thousands of people have got together, done a meditation for peace at a set time, and they found crime rates plummet during the time that they do that meditation, right? So that would be an example of a kind of a deliberate change in the consensus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Change the state of mind of a bunch of meditators, and it's prevented a bunch of other people from committing crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I've
part of
heard
it
of
is our free will, but then, yeah, part of it would appear to be everybody's free will and belief and emotion all kind of combined and averaged out into this thing that we call consensus reality. And when we look into the future with remote viewing, it appears to be probabilistic, right? The further out you go, the less accurate you get. And there seem to be some events, like 9/11 is a good example of one, that was coming out in, well, I mean, you can go look at all the fun websites with all that. It was here and it was there, and they made a movie about it, and they made that, and, it was coming out in the media, but also psychics were seeing it. People were seeing it in their dreams. Remote viewers were seeing it when they should have been looking at other stuff, and they were like, oh, I've drawn these two towers. What the hell? What's going on? Years before that actually happened, years and years. So it seems like that event was kind of definitely going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that doesn't mean that nobody has free will and everything is predetermined, right?
Right.
Because while there are those fixed events, I think most events are much less fixed than that.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as a group of people, as humans, whatever, we can nudge it this way and that way. And if you look at wherever you are right now in your life, you can make choices which will take you a little bit down this path or a little bit down that path. You can kind of nudge yourself a little bit more. You can keep going to college, and then you get a degree, and then you go and you get a job and you get a promotion, and you kind of, it's step by step by step nudging the thing, isn't it? You don't snap your fingers and suddenly somebody just gives you a Nobel Prize and it's like, wow, I only just graduated from high school. Thank you. You actually have to kind of get there step by step, building this wall brick by brick, right?
Right.
And using tools like remote viewing or magic, manifestation, whatever, I think what we can do is we can affect the roll of the dice. We can slightly nudge the probabilities. But what we can't do is drive a bulldozer through everybody's kind of probabilistic field of intertwining probabilities, because then we're not only changing our own life, then we're actually having huge effects on other people's lives and all the people who are going to observe our life and their lives and be affected with like a knock-on effect. And that is, I guess, too big of a change to be permitted, or maybe it's more just it is too unbelievable for too many people, but there's kind of pushback. There's too much pushback from just the average of everybody's belief. I did a I was once given a remote viewing task, so I was blind to the target, not given any information about what I'm supposed to perceive. Off I go to do my work, and I described a kind of mad scientist kind of character in a lab coat up in a tall building, and he's got some cool invention that he wants to show me, and he's like working on this thing, and it's really great, but it's kind of stuck. It doesn't quite work as well as he wants. Still, it's not finished. And outside of this ivory tower, out in the city, there's just hordes and hordes of people producing like grey clouds of smog above them. But it's like a smog of thoughts, of ideas, of beliefs. And I used the words, the world is not ready. And then, in accordance with the protocol, I got my feedback. And my feedback was, what prevents us from getting associative remote viewing accuracy, which we use for doing things like stock picking and sports betting? What prevents us getting the accuracy of associative remote viewing above 80%? And from my data, I can only conclude it is the consensus effect, right? We just cannot screw up reality for everybody else that much. We can give ourselves an advantage. We can load the dice so that they're more likely to roll in our favor, and we can kind of magnetically attract ourselves towards the more desirable outcomes, or the outcomes that we desire more. And we can do that on an individual and a collective level, but we can't just, do Harry Potter shooting fireballs through reality, right?
Right.
It's not going to happen.
So I guess my other question is, what do you think is the future of humanity, of our civilization? Meaning, are we going to sort of go further into the materialistic world and, perfect AI and perfect technology and stuff like that, and ignore the spiritual side of things? Or do you see that at some point there has to be a merger between the sort of spiritual knowledge and the materialistic knowledge, and basically mainstream acknowledgement of the spiritual side for us to even survive, basically? Because if we sort of only focused in the materialistic world, and then it means we only focus on the needs of the body, our primitive instincts, really, ego, stuff like that, which eventually, most likely, probabilistically, will lead to some sort of a disaster. So it seems like in order for a developed civilization to survive, at some point, they have to acknowledge the spiritual side of things, that there is a wider reality beyond this that we can see. So do you think that that will happen, and how do you think that will come about?
That's a good question. So, I mean, obviously, we can't just go further and further down the materialistic rabbit hole. There's a concept in sort of the esoteric traditions of, well, I'll go with various concepts that look at the same thing from different angles. There's the idea of the cosmic arc, which is of divinity, source, the origin of all everything, the uncaused cause, God, whatever you want to call it, kind of descending down to Earth. Obviously, whatever this is has to have kind of created Earth first. So it's not like a movement. It's not like heaven and earth are here and the thing comes down, a little parachute. It's like a changing of the nature of reality such that it begins at, say the moment before the Big Bang, if you want to visualize it, but whatever. It begins at some point, and then reality increases in complexity and nuance and detail and stuff. And at some point along this arc, we find ourselves sitting here recording a podcast and talking to each other in two kind of evolved primate bodies that are really good at talking and have opposable thumbs and invent iPads and do all this wild stuff that we as human beings do. But that this is a step along a kind of cosmic evolutionary path, and that we don't forget that we're a part of that, completely in no way separate from this. Like the idea of being a drop of water in the ocean. You can identify yourself as the drop of water, but you're still part of the ocean. You're no different from it, really. Another lens on this would be the idea of the cosmic egg, this lovely visualization of the universe as, again, originating from this origin point at which things begin to crystallize and nothing turns into something. and it comes flying out of this origin point, and it forms a torus. It goes out and it curls round and it goes back round and back in and disappears again. So you see that in Christianity, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, right? That everything comes from that cause and everything returns to it. So spiritual traditions have known about this since who knows when, right? And you get similar ideas cropping up anywhere you've got mystics, right? And you can. I was once given a remote viewing task to go look at this as well, and like that was wild. I'll maybe talk about that in a minute. But again, there's this idea like you have something so beyond what we can comprehend that we had to invent the word ineffable for it, right? You got something beyond time and space, not before time, because there's no before with no time, right? The thing from which time and space and causality originates, the origin, the source, right? Which we just have to stick a label on and go, well, everything is observably coming from here, so we have to assume that that is a thing. It's outside of what we can conceptualize as humans, right? Because our mind is geared up for 3D space-time, right? It's geared up for drinking tea out of a cup, speaking to each other and flying on airplanes and eating noodles and stuff. Like, we don't have the equipment to properly understand those concepts because, like, we're part of the thing. It's like we spoke earlier about the idea of materialism being unable to explain itself if it's emergent from unable to explain consciousness, because materialism is emergent from consciousness and within it, and you get exactly that same pattern repeating at a larger scale, where reality can't explain reality from inside it, right? And we can't have the perspective of outside it and bring that perspective in. It doesn't make sense. It'll just give you a headache. But anyway, so we're somewhere on this cosmic arc and we're on our way back. Right. Again, another thing that would be pretty uncontroversial for most spiritual and religious traditions, at least if you find the esoteric strands of the religious traditions. And this implies further evolution, right? That there is a materialization, the thing complexifies, but it doesn't just get more and more complex and then fade out and disappear. It doesn't go and dissipate into a kind of giant, dead, empty nothingness. It returns to itself, right? It is an infinite cycle. And it gives you a headache, right? Because this is the creation of time as well as space. So it doesn't make sense to think about it in terms of before and after, but how else are we supposed to think about it?
Right. Are you familiar with Rudolf Steiner? He was...
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I think he had those ideas of different types of societies, of beings, and we are sort of somewhere in between, in the middle of that hierarchy. But he said that as you go up the ladder of hierarchy of civilizations, they eventually stop being material and become spiritualized. I think that's the word he used, spiritualized. So, and that's an interesting theory, that as we evolve, we would evolve past our physical bodies in some way and into some spiritual beings. And, if you think about that, then a lot of the stories about angels and entities start to kind of make sense. Even aliens, all the stories about interdimensional aliens, that appear as spiritual beings. What if, as we evolve past our physical constraints and become basically a civilization, but in the higher sort of astral or spiritual realm?
Yeah, if we ascend. I mean, yeah, sure, why not? One thing that everybody can observe about reality, even if you're a materialist, you can observe that it is fractal. It is deeply fractal, and it is self-similar at all scales. If you look at the structure of neurons within the brain, it's the same as the large-scale structure of galactic clusters within the universe. Like, if you zoom out enough on the universe, the way the galaxies cluster together, forming strands, looks like a brain. It is absolutely wild, right? And so with the idea of fractalness, and you could grab the phrase "as above, so below" for this as well. But there are patterns such as this cosmic arc, cosmic egg, or the sort of materialization, spiritualization arc in anthroposophy, and you can see them at the individual level, like the human being as a microcosm, and you can see them at the macrocosmic, universal, everybody sort of level too. So that might be Earth evolves, and when one of the dimensions that we're looking at is time, we see things becoming materialized and crystallized and getting to here, and then hopefully getting more spiritual and getting, coming down for like a flyby through the physical plane like that. But we can also see this within an individual's lifetime, right? And that you might say an individual starts off as, a twinkle in their father's eye, right? A person doesn't start off as a person, right? The person starts off as potential, and then they grow, a body is grown, and at some point they come to identify with it and go, this is me, look, I can do human stuff, and off they go and do a bunch of human stuff, and then the body breaks down, and they realize, oh wait, my consciousness didn't stop, holy shit. Right. And if you resuscitate the body, then they come back into it sometimes and go, guys, oh my god, never guess what happened to me, right? and they tell you about that, right? And then you look at spiritual traditions, right, where they talk about attaining states beyond attachment to their body and very spiritualized kind of high states where you're in touch with these high levels of consciousness, or unity consciousness, or Christ consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, or you plugged straight into divinity, if you like, and you become one of those people who just sits in the temple smiling incessantly and sitting there all day as a trail of people turn up wanting to be healed or have their problem solved, and you just wave your hands and miracles happen and it's all great. You could be someone like Anandamayi Ma, who was a Hindu saint who was said to be like an avatar of the divine, and she wasn't big on religion and structure and rules and this is how it is and doctrine. She was really an embodiment of just unconditional universal love, right? She did the odd miracle. She did quite a lot of miracles, but always just to help people out. She was just really cool. Right. So she's an interesting biography to look into if you want to see what that looks like when you kind of the process of manifesting the divine on Earth looks like that. You get that in the real holy people, the real sages and saints and whatever, in whatever tradition. No religion has a monopoly on truth or reality. So that shows up. So we can access it either, by moving a long way in time or by moving within ourselves. So we can just wait for humanity to evolve. Maybe not in our lifetimes, but the thing must evolve, right? We can only be certain of death and taxes and change.
For sure.
Or we can evolve ourselves. In the meantime, if we're impatient. But
we can do our
best. I was once tasked to remote view I'm not going to name this guy because I don't want to upset people, but it was a controversial modern religious spiritual figure. Who has a big following to this day. He's dead now. Died a while back. But this was a guy who started a religion. And it's not necessarily a bad religion, it's got some good ideas in it. It's pretty cool. The followers are pretty happy. It's pretty good stuff, right? But, at the end of the day, he cooked up a religion, and that upsets people. And so I was given this as a blind remote viewing task to just go look at this guy's life. What was going on here? That was weird, right? Most people don't do this in their life. What was up with this dude? And I did get that there was this spiritual influence. And it was funny, I experienced it as like a Morgan Freeman narration, It was, but it was like the voiceover. But there was definitely like a kind of external, non-physical element to that guy's life.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some non-physical entities which were involved, and he was kind of like, all right, I'll go down to Earth, and then you guys, help me out at the arranged time, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But I also got information about the nature of religion, not just the one that he started, but that this was kind of like an entertainment, or like a game that you could play from the higher planes of consciousness. Was like, let's go to Earth and start a religion. And that there was an element of manipulation. I just described it as like rats in a maze, but also like a great element of hope that it's like a boat race in a river where everybody's in different boats, different religions and spiritual traditions, and indeed people who don't practice any kind of religion or spiritual tradition, and they're kind of racing each other down the river. Okay, but if you just sit in your boat and you do nothing, you will also get to the sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
The great sort of flow of time and the universe and evolution or whatever is ultimately going to carry everything to the same place. And you
Yeah.
can drive around in your boat and have fun, or you can speed run it if you want, or you
Right.
can row against. You can row against it. You can go, oh, the good old days were the best. I'm going to go back to how they used to do things. Just kind of not deal with the present and the problems which the current phase of evolution brings to our to challenge us. I'm just
Right.
going to go kind of la la la. I'm going to go live like it's 2,000 years ago, and stick my head in the sand and worship the old gods and live by the old ways and hope that everything can just stay the same without ever changing, which is just like a fundamentally egoic desire. That's what the ego wants. It doesn't want anything to change. That's where the story of Peter Pan comes from. Kid that
Mm-hmm.
never grew up. Right? That's ego.
Right.
It has to do that to keep us alive, right? But when it makes us behave regressively out of this delusion that we can live forever, if
Yeah.
only we fail to embrace change, whatever the challenges of the day are. It's kind of unhealthy manifestation of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering actually. During in your adventure with paranormal and psi, um, have you ever encountered any of entities like we talked about, positive or negative? Um, I just wonder if remote viewing sort of intersects with that feature of that reality, and if you have some interesting stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, remote viewing itself doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with that. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of common that people who train in remote viewing, they have a higher probability of running into those phenomena because they're opening up their awareness, right? They're training their non-local perception. They're training their psychic awareness, the clairs, whatever framework you want to look at it through. They're developing that skill. And it's kind of like tuning a radio, right? The spiritual planes, if you like. There's here we are down on Earth, and then there's a whole pile of different levels of kind of the manifestation of creation, and at the far end of that is that uncaused cause, that source, that ineffable thing that some people call God or the universe or source or whatever, right? Somehow that thing complicates itself and complicates itself and complicates itself until we get here. And what we're doing in remote viewing, I think, is we're just moving our awareness, so to speak, kind of up in that stack to a layer outside of space-time. And we're getting some of the information about our target. And you might be familiar with the literature around so-called astral projection or out-of-body experience. And it's quite common there that people will have an out-of-body experience. They'll be laying in bed, they'll be paralyzed, they'll hear weird sounds, they'll feel themselves falling through their body or rolling out, or they'll just suddenly wake up in the night and they're on the ceiling looking down at their body, or whatever. But somehow they will find that their awareness is not in their physical body, but they'll still be in their bedroom or whatever. They'll be in the vicinity of the physical body. And it's really common to see people reporting and I could recognize it. It was my home. Everything was where I left it, except there was this chair in the corner, which I've never owned. I don't know where it came from. Or there was like this weird lamp by the bed. Everything else was the same, right? But there's something is a little bit screwy about it. And we actually kind of get a similar flavor of noise in remote viewing. And I see it as like, if you think of physical reality as like playing a video game, where there's actually behind that video game experience, there's source code and artwork, and then there's a graphics card that's turning the code into beautiful moving images. But there's there's an underlying description of how things are, and then there's a process by which that gets turned into an experience. And I think in remote viewing, what we're doing is we're kind of looking at the source code, or looking at the lower level part of how reality is created, which doesn't match up one-to-one with how things are, right?
Right.
And that's an idea that you see in the sort of occult esoteric traditions, this idea of the astral plane and the mental plane and the causal plane and various spiritual planes. And different traditions break it down differently. Some of them have got millions of different planes, and some of them have got like 3. But they all have the same basic idea behind that kind of divvying up of reality, that you go up, to use a physical metaphor to explain a fundamentally non-physical spiritual concept, as we're forced to do. You go up through the planes, and you're going towards the divine, the ineffable, but there's a lot of stops on the way. And one of the very first stops that people bump into is what in the esoteric world gets called the lower astral plane. And this is an area of all of humanity's junk, all of our weird obsessions and guilt and karma and psychological complexes and generational trauma and individual trauma and random dissociated bits of consciousness playing out stories over and over again. Like, it's not inherently evil, but it's crazy town. It's like a bad acid trip up there, and it's just full of crazy shit. But it's the first thing that people bump into. And it's kind of like, this is why you will hear me and other people saying, don't go playing with Ouija boards, kids. Right? Just don't. It's something bad will happen. If anything happens, it will be bad. So it's like picking up a phone and just dialing a random number. You might get someone chill and cool on the other end. You might get somebody really harmful. Or you might get somebody who just screws with you for entertainment. Right? Or it's like walking through a bad neighborhood with a big wad of cash going, hey, hi everyone, it's lovely to meet you. Would somebody help me spend my money? Waving your big wad of cash around, right? It's like going in the sea when the piranhas are hungry. Yeah, you kind of light yourself up like an all-you-can-eat buffet in this insane layer of psychological junk. And you kind of have to just push through that, right? And it's not universal that people learning remote viewing will really experience this much either. It's not a part of the learning process, but because of how we're changing our mind-body system when we learn this or another psychic discipline, we're more likely to come into contact with it than lay people, right? And it can be very scary, but I mean, it's fundamentally, it's like Omegle. It's information. It can ruin people's lives. It can totally screw people's lives up. But it does that by manipulating their beliefs and their worldview, not because it has some great spiritual power. That these are not demons that can explode your brain by snapping their evil fingers. They're demons which can convince you to ruin your own life by exploiting your psychological blind spots, or just exacerbating the conflict within your psyche, right? So if you do your spiritual work, if you do your shadow work, if you heal your trauma, if you go to therapy, if you do whatever it is, whatever modality, if you heal yourself and you clear that junk out and you bring the unconscious into the conscious, then that stuff, you reduce the amount of open doors and blind spots and dark shadows that allows that stuff to have a negative effect on you. And a great deal of it will appear to be an independent, phenomenologically, you get stuff which will appear to be an independent entity with free will, which is out to get you and is clever, and it can read your mind and it can tell what you're scared of, and that's why it looks like the thing that you're scared of. And it's like, why don't we invoke Occam's razor here and say that the explanation which requires the fewest number of assumptions is more likely to be correct, in that this is actually you doing this to yourself, right? There is a transpersonal thing there, right? But all of the way that you're experiencing it, all of the scary shit that you're seeing for yourself is actually out of your own subconscious. There is not some powerful being that reads your mind and finds your fears and then puts on the face of your fears because it's going to manipulate you because it's evil. And like, stop making up this huge story. Just because you saw something that scared the shit out of you doesn't mean that it was done to you, right? It is just you came into contact with something a bit wacky that interacts with your perceptual system in a weird way, and it scared the bejesus out of you, and maybe allowing yourself to kind of get sucked into that fear is going to make you vulnerable to further psychological harm. But actually, if you just kind of laugh the thing off, like there's the Bogart scene in Harry Potter where they have the magical creature that will turn into whatever you're most afraid of, and the way to get rid of it is to laugh at it. And I think that's probably the only accurate scene in the whole series of movies, right, about the way this stuff works. But in the case of astral entities, that works absolutely, but yeah, that's a common thing for people to bump into, whether it's remote viewing or whether it's kind of occultism or magic or spiritual practice. This can happen to meditators. You sit there, you kind of expand your consciousness out through these layers, weird stuff is going to show up. And I think in all cases, just don't get overexcited by it. And then there's other classes of things. There is some. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, continue. I'm curious what you're going to say. Other classes of things.
Well, I mean that's astral entities. That's the there are things which, when you bring them into your kind of local space, feel like they have free will. They come with a lot of energy. They're really intense presences to have around. These are things which, it's harder to say that's not a being, that's not an independent thing. Much more of this thing is about it than is about me as the person perceiving it. And a couple of years ago, I was involved in the creation of this remote viewing modality or anti-modality called cowboy remote viewing, where we were kind of bringing the ideas from chaos magic, which is like chaos magic compared to grimoire magic, the traditional robes and magic wands and chanting in Latin kind of thing. This was like punk rock meets classical, of going, do we really need all the dressing up and the Latin and the complexity, guys? Can we just chuck out all this ritual and pare this practice back to what makes it work? And just, if we ditch all the symbols and the woo-woo and the bells and smells, what are we really doing here, right? So we thought it'd be fun to bring the practice of magical evocation or spirit summoning, right, within the remote viewing protocol. So you've got an operator who's going to do the psychic thing. They're going to talk to something, but they don't know what it is. It is anything ever with which you might be able to have a conversation. So it's not going to be a rock, but it might be a fictional character. It might be a human being, living or dead. It could be a deity, an entity, made up space aliens, whatever, right? You just don't know before you do it. So we thought, hey, let's give this a try. And it turns out it works really, really well. The very first one that we did, the target was Doctor Strange, the movie magician, right? And I was the viewer. I was blind to the target. I hadn't the faintest idea what this could be. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see something. I can see this guy here. And he's holding like a big round shiny thing. And I thought it was like a big serving platter, like a big brass plate or so, or it looked like a kind of gong or something. But when you think about the movie, they have all the graphics with the big shiny circly, sigily things that they all draw, right? I guess it was that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can see an audience here. There's an audience here too, and they're seeing themselves reflected in what this person is doing. So the monitor asked me, oh, ask him what he thinks of our magic practice, and he goes like, oh, that's adorable. It's really sweet. So it answered in character, right? It's made up. Doctor Strange isn't real. It's a fictional character, but it exists in psychic space, right? It exists in the collective unconscious, maybe. I don't know. We can't prove where it exists or what the nature of that existence is, but it does, right? Because it can be perceived
archetype
accurately.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean maybe the character of Doctor Strange, big shiny circle included, was present already, and then that manifested into the world through becoming a movie character?
Maybe. I'm just wondering.
I think that's possible. That's definitely. There are people who talk about that kind of thing. I think with I think it was maybe one of the Superman comics. I would have to look it up, but yeah, there's certainly people who feel that that's happened in their work, that they were bringing something into reality rather than creating something. Yeah, right. Like the thing is there, and it's been like, hey, right now write this, now write that. No. I refuse to feature in this story. This isn't me at all. This is off-brand. So yeah, I mean, maybe we did it with Mickey Mouse too. I find it hard to believe that Mickey Mouse is entirely archetypal. It might be now, but I don't think Mickey Mouse existed and then Walt Disney made a cartoon of it. Maybe but Mickey Mouse was horrible.
I was just saying, maybe there's another way of this happening, is if, let's say, someone, like you said, someone creates a fictional character and that character becomes very famous, like Mickey Mouse or Superman or whatever. It's sort of like an inception where they create it through their thoughts, and that's just sort of lives now in some sort of astral plane, because people interact with it all the time by thinking about it, by having dreams about it, but whatever. It's who knows?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look into thought forms, tulpas, egregores, that kind of stuff, why not?
What do you think? Let's say, let's just one more time just talk about those negative entities, demons or whatever, the ones that have some nefarious motivations that are hostile. What do you think is their actual motivation? Why would they waste their time messing with someone's life or whatever? For what purpose? Like, is it some sort of a kind of like an astral bandit type situation where they just are just bad and they do it for fun, or is there some actual higher purpose in that whole thing?
Okay, there's probably many answers to that question, but I think a good place to start is to look at human beings who abuse other human beings and look at why they behave that way. Right? That it is possible to have consciousness structured in such a way that the needs of the self-concept are only going to be met by behaving in ways which other people are going to experience as negative. So a lot of astral entities, they don't have free will. They're not a first-class being. They're composed of a cognitive dissonance, if you like. They are made of an unmet need. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. That is like, I want to go home. Or I want to be nurturing to my children. Or something like that, right? These are... If you can sit there and be really upset about something, if you can go to therapy and free yourself of something and feel great about it, those things, that's what astral entities have at their core, is basically a complex of some sort or another. It is like a tangled spaghetti knot of thought and emotion and energy, right? It's not a being. It's a story that is kind of animated, that is given energy, very often by humans, very often completely inadvertently. And these kind of things can be created deliberately, but most of them are not. They're the result of trauma and rumination and terrible accidents and sudden deaths and people having horrible experiences. And then there's, who knows what else is going on in the non-physical planes. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on up there, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert in it, but that's kind of the nature of many of those phenomena, right? So if you have anything within you that resonates with that, which most of us do, right? And that doesn't have to be like a major dominant visible personality trait. That could just be like a little small t trauma from childhood. That time that your teacher yelled at you and made you cry when you were 4 and had just started school, and now you're late for everything by 5 minutes and you've never known why. Stuff like that, little splinters that get stuck in the mind that we're not necessarily aware of them at all, but they're still present and affecting us on a kind of subtle unconscious level. And the way entity attachment works is basically like a sympathetic resonance. So if you have 2 tuning forks that are tuned to the same frequency, if you strike one and set it ringing, the other one will just begin to ring, right? The energy will transfer perfectly from one into the other. So you're there with this subconscious trauma content, which is kind of energized a little bit by your life experience and your emotional energy and the energy that moves in the human body, whatever. So you're kind of striking the tuning fork. These thought complexes are out there, and they will sort of ring in resonance, and they'll come, and then there's like a magnetic pull, and you got entity attachment, which is why people often experience these when they're doing really deep healing work, right? Because you start healing all your traumas. It's like just lifting pages off. You're kind of digging down through all this stuff. Oh yeah, heal that, feel those feelings that I didn't heal, do that. And eventually, you lift something off, and underneath there's like a scary monster going, Rawr! And it's like, oh, it just wants to be loved, and that's why it's here. This is here for a time when I didn't feel loved, and this thing is just glommed on, and you can deal with them therapeutically in a way that doesn't require any kind of transpersonal woo-woo terminology or belief or system of understanding, right? You can be a materialist atheist therapist with a materialist atheist client, and if they experience an astral entity where a terrifying face comes up in front of them and goes, ooh, and they feel an intense emotional thing, you can say to them, oh, well, sometimes the mind personifies things that it's not ready to accept and externalizes it. And let's talk to this thing, assuming that it is a part of you. And we'll ask it what experience it's had and blah, blah, blah. We'll do the process with it. And honestly, that was how, when I was first learning about this phenomena, that was how I approached it, right? Because I always try to see the horse before the zebra, right? If there's a prosaic explanation for something, let me have it, right? My life is weird enough. I don't need to make up extra weird stuff or assume things are weird, because often they're not, right? And it doesn't help. So because you can deal with this phenomena as if it was prosaic and just sort of an individual psychological thing, I was like, well, until proven otherwise, I'm going to assume that that's what it is. And then one day I treated, well, I'd say treated, I'm not a therapist, I healed somebody of this, and somebody else got better at the same time from doing the same really specific, weird, negative behavior. And I was like, oh, holy shit, no way. And it was like, it was really marked. And I thought, wow, maybe there is a transpersonal aspect to this after all, And then there's demons.
What
But
about
I mean, that's a label, right? That's like, yeah, well, it's a label, okay? It's like the word God. As soon as you say it, everybody has a huge amount of baggage that they attach to that. And it's like, do you believe in this? Well, what do you mean by that? Right? There are more seriously negative, or what we would experience as negative things. Okay. If you go and swim in the sea and you swim down really deep with no scuba tank, you will run out of oxygen and you will die. That does not make the sea evil. The sea is not a demon or a devil, but you can't breathe in it. Right? And I think a lot of phenomena which people might label as demonic. It's that kind of thing, right? I love nature and animals. I feed the birds in my garden, and I'm always really pleased to see wildlife and everything. But I don't park my car underneath the tree that the birds sit in because they will shit on it, right? And if the birds shit on my car, I don't say, "Oh, birds are so evil. They're out to get me. Look what they've done." I just don't park there, right? And I think a lot of the phenomena which people might ascribe evil to are just things. They're things which are maybe not where you want them, and maybe things which screw your life up. But they're just things. There isn't some kind of sinister intent there, or if there is, there's nothing personal. These are like forces of nature. And if you're going to use the word demons, then I suppose you have to counterpoint it with the word angels. And conceptually, these things are really personifications of forces of nature. These are functions of creation. Okay, you can summon up the archangels from the Christian pantheon. That's something that Western occultists love to do, summoning angels and archangels, because they'll do all sorts of stuff for you. They'll help you grow and get stuff in your life, and they'll answer questions for you, and they'll clear space. They're useful, right? They're really useful. So a classic one is the Archangel Michael, which is a force of the universe which was around before Christianity came along and gave it a name, and before occultists came along and gave it a sigil and a special system for summoning this thing, right? And that thing has always been there, as far as I know, and it serves a specific function. If you summon the Archangel Michael, you cannot make small talk with it, right? It did not watch the game this weekend. It does not care, right? It's like talking to fire or plasma or something. It doesn't fucking make sense to be like, oh, do you like this outfit or that outfit? You're talking to a force of nature, right? And you can talk to it because it is, an aspect of consciousness. You can have some kind of communication with it, and it will do stuff that is amazing. But it's in its lane, and you can't project your humanity onto these things, because if you do, it gives you a confused idea of what they are. So if there is a demon, an evil, nasty demon, ooh, scary, right? There's fundamentally something there, and it does something that you really don't like, and you don't know what it is, right? And so you look at it and project onto it as if it was a human being. You apply the same rules that you would apply to a human being, and you assume, it must be out to get me. I'm a victim of it. There must be something about me that makes me a victim. And this story starts to build itself out of nothing, because you're trying to cram a fundamentally hard to understand, very non-human phenomena into a human lens, and it leads to delusion. And obviously, that can then exacerbate, spiral out of control, right? And
So
you get
what about
one guy who works
Archangel?
really interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask.
So, go ahead.
What about Archangel Michael? You said that he can do very useful things. What do people use him for, or summon him for? What is his function?
Oh, what I use him for is clearing space and yeeting entities, because there's a proper way to do it. There's all sorts of ways of doing it, but it's kind of like, and this is very irreligious of me to phrase it this way, but it's like bug spray. There's all these bugs flying around, all these flies, and get out. So yeah, that's not the way that I would address that force, because it's not a productive way to relate to it. I would treat it with respect, but functionally speaking, it you can do other things with it. But that's what I personally use it for. Is just if stuff's got a bit out of hand, I need to kind of set the sprinklers off and just be like, oh shit, call in the big guns. Let's just yeet this thing. You can't really go wrong. So yeah, if anybody's experiencing that kind of thing, I would highly recommend go and Google that and find a way of accessing that force that you're culturally compatible with and comfortable with, because it's great and it's very effective.
So you mean clearing negative energies or entities or whatever, if there is something close to you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, it does seem like that concept of demons and angels, at least when you sort of analyze it, it's always sort of almost boils down to one thing, where demons or Lucifer, whatever, is the one who's trying to convince you that it's okay to be selfish, it's okay to care about your own needs, it's okay to be human, it's okay to be hedonistic, and there's it's not sinful to sort of take pleasure in this sort of physical life. And the angel is more about, think about everyone else, you're part of the whole. There is something greater beyond this physical life. So you have those two things, and it's not that one thing is bad and the other is good. It's more so, it's just up to you what you're gonna lean into, right? Which side. And maybe you have to experience both to really understand life in a way.
I think that's maybe a bit of a pop culture spin on the dichotomy. Like, how would you define sin?
Well, I'm saying, like, that's what I mean. I'm not saying that I think it's sin, but that's how our society views it, right? Where one side is
Mm.
trying to
But
sort of.
all right, well, what definition of sin are they using there? Right, because the definition that I think I would use is stuff which gets you further away from divinity, right?
Right,
Stuff
right.
which is the opposite of walking forward on the path of spiritual development.
Hmm.
And you can apply the notion of karma here, but you don't have to, right? That often we have to we have to do things which at a surface level you might say, oh, that's bad, or that's not spiritual, or that's low vibration, or that's sinful, or um whatever your tradition uses to be judgmental and labeling of other people's behavior. You would apply that negative judgment onto that behavior, right? But often the way out is through. If you look at I think a really good example is people with addictions who
Hmm.
have to hit rock bottom before they can actually step outside of that kind of loop of behaviors and see it for what it is and overcome it, right? But
Hmm.
if you get an addict and you just make them quit, you go, we're having an intervention, you're going to rehab, you know, you force them to break off that pattern of behavior, they're going to start it up again.
Hmm.
Um, but if you allow them to come right to the edge of death or lose all their money or whatever the penalty is for the behavior that they're doing, then they will heal, right?
Hmm.
And the same with all kinds of obsessions, and like there comes a point where you've smoked enough cigarettes, you've
Hmm.
drunk enough alcohol, you've had enough sex, you've got enough Pokemon cards. There's a point at which all these things you look at them and go, yeah, I'm now able to give up the idea that this is going to lead to completeness,
Hmm.
right? The thing, I've explored that delusion to its limit. Um,
Right.
so the way out is through. So to look at selfishness, what you might call selfishness or self-interest or whatever, is sinful and something that demons are gonna encourage you to do. Maybe, yeah. I mean, certainly, if that's going to screw your life up and cause you a great deal of emotional distress, there are probably, I would say, I think it's quite likely that there are categories of non-physical things which would really love you to do that.
Hmm.
And if you look at the work of Jerry Marzinski, he's a psychiatrist who worked in like secure hospitals, I think, or prisons, but only for people with paranoid schizophrenia. Um, and unlike his colleagues, he was interested in like the phenomenology of this, right? Because these people are hearing voices, and all day the voices are saying to them, "You suck, you're shit, you're not good enough, go kill yourself, everybody hates you, you'll never amount to anything." It's a constant stream of negative stuff. And he was like, "This is really weird. Why is this happening to people? It's like odd for this to be a mental thing." And he was like mainstream. This guy was a total normie out of medical school into psychiatry, and this is where he found himself, right? So he goes to these patients and he's like, "Hey, can I talk to the voices that you hear? Can you like be the intermediary? I
Hmm.
want to kind of ask them some questions, if that'd be okay, right? And over time, he has more of these conversations, and he comes to the conclusion that these are independent entities, right? That they're actually feeding off people's energy.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they do this is to this is now not Jerry Marzinski. This is now my own hot take, but the mechanism of this, because I was curious, so I looked at this psychically. So you got to take this with a huge pinch of salt, as my UPG, my unverified personal gnosis, right? But I looked at this because I was really curious. Like, how does it make sense in the universe that there is a creature whose mechanism of feeding is just being a dick to people? Like, how does that make any sense? It doesn't. There doesn't seem to be any nutrition in
Right.
just being a dick, right?
Mm-hmm.
But right, so we've got a sense of self. Okay, it is made of a big pile of stories and beliefs and memories and shit that all orbits around basically nothing. And there is a process within the physical body, call it ego. There's a mechanism which really works hard to keep that thing together. It does not want it to come apart. That is psychologically not good. It's not good for the survival of the organism. And it expends energy in order to do this. And where you have cognitive dissonance, it's like bringing like two of the same poles of a magnet together where they will repel. You're bringing two thoughts together which will repel from each other. And if you want to push them together, it takes a lot of energy. So what these entities are doing is they're essentially activating latent content within the mind, which comes into direct conflict with the kind of core beliefs that are essential for survival. Like I deserve to be loved. I am capable of having good ideas. I am smart enough to understand the world and cope with it. Like really basic firmware level beliefs, which we all have to have about ourselves in order to function, in order to like have a functioning sense of self, right? So what these things are doing is they're amping up all the stuff which is in conflict with our survival narrative, right? So that now we're kind of pushing two north poles of the magnet together, and energy is released to stop these things from blowing the sense of self apart, right? And that's what these things are feeding on. The trope of the wizard battle with the two guys like shooting magic stuff at each other, and there's a blue one and a red one, and they're going. If you've got this cognitive dissonance thing, it's kind of like that, metaphorically speaking. Yeah. So that is my entirely unverified hot take on the esoteric workings of the at least in cases where paranoid schizophrenia is caused by entities.
Right.
Perhaps it's not all cases, but in those cases, that is my hot take on what the mechanism is and why they're doing that. And that's food. Okay. Think of creatures which will cut the bark of a tree to drink the sap. They're evolved to drink that sap. Okay. It's not very nice for the tree, but it's not very nice for the creature to die. Yeah, the entities once said to Jerry Marzinski, "You have no right to interfere in our way of life." Right? Maybe they got a point, and maybe they're serving a useful purpose here. It's very unpleasant for people, but maybe it's useful nonetheless. People who've had transformative near-death experiences, right? They've had to get killed first. They've had to die in a horrible mangly car wreck and be paralyzed and lose their limbs and have all this pain in the hospital and recovery. They had a really shit time. And that was the cost for their transformative experience. And they wouldn't have it another way, right? Because it's given them their life. It's shown them a side of reality they would never have seen before, right? So we can't, just because an experience is unpleasant doesn't make it bad. And I'm not saying go and get paranoid schizophrenia, it'll be fun. I'm not recommending it, but it's not a black and white good and evil thing.
For sure. And no, totally agree with that. It sort of reminds me of the idea of alchemy, where in order to create something, to sort of become who you truly are supposed to be, you have to have internal battle, and you have to fail. You have to get as close to death as possible and live through a trauma and alchemize those. And if you're successful, then you'll alchemize those bad experiences into some knowledge that will sort of illuminate you and make you make you who you were supposed to truly be. And so that's the theme that's throughout, human history. And that's what I meant when I was talking about demons, that they're sort of like nudging you to sort of lean into your selfishness. Maybe we have to lean into that in order to fully understand it, in order to really, go the other side knowingly, and not be pushed in there. um yeah.
Yeah, but there is an extent, right, to which we need it as well.
Mhm.
Um, you actually
Well,
have
that's
to
what I
look
mean.
after
We
yourself.
all need it. We
What good
that's
can you
so
do
I
in the
think
world
might
if
be
you
useful
starve
to.
because you're like, I don't want to eat any food? That's selfish.
Mhm.
No,
That
eat.
exactly. So maybe
Right?
selfish is a bad word. It's not a bad word, but it has a negative connotation. But if you strip the connotation, being selfish has its purpose, right? It can teach you things.
Yeah, I think we're still in problematic territory with the word selfish, right? Because nobody really does, well, almost nobody, almost never does anything that isn't selfish, right? Because even altruism is actually driven by motives which are ultimately self-referential, right? We are doing altruistic things because we have taken into our sense of identity beliefs about what kind of person we are and how we must behave in order to
Mhm.
be that person, right? We're still validating our own scripts, even if we're a holier than thou do-gooder who's wearing a hair shirt and running a soup kitchen, right?
Mhm. For
No matter
sure.
how altruistic we are, ultimately it is selfish
Yeah. So,
with an
you can
exception or two.
you can think of it too as if someone who sort of has seen past the veil and now realized that the physical reality is just a sliver of what's out there, and let's say sees that we're all actually connected and we're all part of one, and it's not just a fancy sort of slogan for them, but they truly experienced it, so they truly believe it. So therefore, acting selfishly, it's not even conducive for them in any positive way, because they act altruistically because it just makes sense to them, because they have experienced the feeling of interconnectedness with everyone else, right? So so I think, but to get there, sometimes you have to think of yourself first and just ignore everyone else, and be an asshole, basically. Sometimes
You
that's
have to look
enough,
out
right?
after yourself, right? You don't have to be an asshole to look after yourself, right? You can still be a decent person and look after yourself, right? It's not an evil thing to um have your
Well,
physical
yeah,
body comfortable.
I'm talking
Like
about.
I could save the environment by turning off all the heating in my house, and I could be fucking freezing and uncomfortable, right? Am I going to be able to do my work as well? No, I'm not, right?
Yeah.
No, put the heating on, feed yourself good food. The amount to which you can express love for yourself is the ceiling. That sets the limit on how much you can express love for others and how much you can be loved by others. Self love actually comes first. It's foundational in,
Mm.
you want to be putting this good work out in the world. Change starts at home. Right? Asceticism, it's an interesting practice to explore, but it's ass backwards. I think look after yourself, care for yourself, love yourself. Ask
Right.
yourself every day, what would a person who loves themselves do right now?
100%.
See
I
how you're
agree with
speaking
that.
to yourself.
I'm talking more about, let's say, a person who commits, a fraud, I don't know, steals money from millions of people on the stock market, something, and just does not give a shit. That's, basically does as much to enrich themselves at the cost of everyone else. Well, if you're live in a materialistic paradigm, that kind of behavior makes total sense. Why the hell wouldn't you do
Yeah.
that? You're gonna die, everything stops. Like, what the fuck? Just enjoy your life as much as you can. You don't have to care about anybody else.
Yeah.
It actually logically makes sense to live this way. But if you don't live in a
Mhm.
materialistic paradigm, that it stops making any sense, right? So
Well,
yeah,
and I think people need to have that experience of living that way
yeah.
and being old and rich and fucking unfulfilled, deeply unfulfilled, and realizing,
Hmm.
wait, I did it wrong. Yeah,
Right.
look at that. You can see this with people who make a huge amount of money at a young age,
Hmm.
celebrities and sports people and whatnot. People who just get crazy rich, and they get the mansion. They maybe do the drug addiction and rehab thing. They build a theme park. They have a vanity range of shoes or fashion wear. They do it all. They got every possible decoration you could do to your ego or altered state of consciousness or self gratification. They can just do it all, and it allows them to overcome it and be like, wait, none of these things were what I really wanted. Whereas a
Hmm.
lot of people who don't do that are stuck in a situation of constantly wanting that stuff, and they don't have the mega million salary that allows them to live in a big mansion and snort cocaine off dwarfs' heads while people feed them caviar and whatever the fuck it is people do, right? And so they're just in this constant state of wanting that, and they never actually get to the point of realizing I don't really want it,
Hmm.
which is worse. Actually,
Hmm.
it's better to make a huge amount of money and live a debauched lifestyle if that is going to lead you to spiritual maturity rather than sitting there and doing nothing and just staying stuck in your personal evolution.
Yeah, 100%, exactly. Um,
Not advocating harming other people, by the way, but like in terms of you
Sometimes
can't
you
bypass it, right? The way
gotta.
out is through.
Yeah. I want to ask you something, sort of nearing to the end of the thing. I'm actually curious. Yeah, we in the beginning of the interview we talked about the mainstream science and mainstream not fully accepting, the paranormal psi phenomena. But then there's also the other side of the medal where, CIA was doing experiments with remote viewing, and not just experiments, but actually used remote viewers for decades in order to spy on other countries. And, that officially, has ended, but it's probably still going on, right? So it does
Yeah,
seem
it's
like
still
there's,
going on.
yeah, and it's not just remote viewing. I would imagine
It's
there
not.
is
It's not.
more
It
aspect.
is basically occult magic in the most outrageous terms you can describe is
Yeah,
going on at the highest levels of power globally, definitely
exactly.
for sure.
Can
Right.
you can you talk about that? Do you
And
have any?
very powerful people in the world know that this stuff is real. Why
Mm,
do you think they're so rich and powerful? Right? Because they're
mhm,
leveraging this stuff. They have a proper understanding of how the mind works. They're not limited by materialist psychological paradigms, right?
mhm,
They're not limited by materialist models of reality. Um, that some to take one person who I won't name, um, just so that I don't get it Epsteined. Um, but there is a prominent world leader at the moment who has some buddies who are very powerful shamans, and they live at a very high latitude. And they've done an excellent piece of psychic protection work for this guy. It's really elegant work. It's brilliant, right? You look at powerful world leaders, most of them are protected. There is stuff going on the non-physical planes, and I I know this because I sometimes get tasked blind to remote view these people, and I bump into this. I bump into literally psychic protection, right? And who is making this stuff? I once I once was given the task of viewing a prominent French politician, and his protection was so bargain basement, so ghetto, so shallow that I actually got sidetracked from my task, and I went and looked at who had developed it because it was so poor. It was such bad workmanship, right? Because I made to connect to the target. I knew it was a person. I didn't know who it was. Um, and as I say, it turned out to be a very prominent French politician. And I just saw this blinding bright white light. Didn't see anything there. I'm like, hmm, that's odd. What's going on here? And I try connecting again, blinding white light again. And I'm like, odd. Okay, yeah. What's the function of the light? Like, what would I see if this light wasn't here? Where's it coming from? Let's be curious. Let's ask some questions here. And it was like, yeah, the purpose of the light is to blind you. The intent is you are blinded. Anybody trying to peek in here is blinded. Um, I'm experiencing that as this bright light. And that was it, right? And because this is all information, right? You can think of it as just computer files if you insist on putting it in that kind of metaphor. It's all information that can be manipulated and pushed around with energy. It's not special. The big powerful shaman, the big powerful wizard or rabbi or whoever it is who's cooking up your stuff is working with the same raw material as everybody else, right? And it is a matter of, well, actually, no, it's complex, right? But it's all made of thought. It's the same stuff. Thoughts are things. You have thoughts, I have thoughts. They're made of the same material. And when you go to construct all of this wacky non-physical stuff, it's just made of thought. It's just made of information. So if you notice that this is going on, you can bypass it really easily, right? It's as simple as saying, what would I see if this wasn't here? You know, let's just navigate to a different web URL. Let's just make a different database query. Let's just go around the back of this. And the reason that it's often so effective is because it's very hard to notice that it's happening, right? And the subtler the deception, the more effective it is. And the guy who's friends with some shamans who live at a very high latitude, his is really effective because you don't notice it's there. It's really, really nice, really subtle, because you think, oh, I described the target accurately, got all the data, it all lines up, and you don't notice that things have been removed and changed. So that's a really great way to do it. Some of these things, and I don't know how this works, definitely out of my wheelhouse, above my pay grade, but some of these things will actually give you a headache. There are certain very, very famous secret military installations which people could no doubt guess, where if you try and remote view that place, if sometimes you will get a fake target, you will get something completely like off the wall, and you will just get data about something else. And because you're blind to the target when you do this, you don't know that it's wrong, right? You just get fed a lie. And sometimes you will get a splitting headache. And I've had two completely different targets, both national security related, both different countries, where as soon as I've made target contact, I've got a headache. And I'm not somebody who gets headaches ordinarily, right? You know, and then as soon as you disconnect from the target, headache goes away. You know, how do they do that? I don't know how they do that. Some people say it's technological. I mean, if it is, it's not technology that's based purely on a materialist understanding and physics. But yeah, I don't know how that works. But there is crazy, crazy stuff going on. And it's not, I don't really involve myself with it. I try not to, you know, step on anybody's toes massively with like matters of national security, because I just don't play those games. You know, I don't move in that world. I'm here like I'm beating the stock market, beating sports bets, solving business problems for people, solving psychological problems. You know, I'm here in the part of the world and the parts of the psyche in which I work, doing what good that I can do. Yeah, so these things are interesting to explore, but you know, I'm not a government spooky person. I suppose if I was, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but trust me, I'm not. I'm sure they don't hire people this crazy, right? So yeah, it's interesting, that stuff, but maybe there's better things to investigate, better ways to spend your time than worrying too much about what the elite families are doing with their occult stuff, right? Yeah. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with that information? It's a waste of your energy attending to it.
For sure. So as a remote viewer, you know, you have a company, what you're usually tasked with, like what would be, if someone wanted to hire you, you know, your services, what is the range, the menu that you give them?
There is no usually. The only thing that I've been tasked with repeatedly is financial stuff, right? That's the only thing that's pretty much the same every time you do it. So that can be, you know, stocks, shares, indices, assets, currencies, whatever. Let's look at future values. I'm part of a group of remote viewers called Second House Remote Viewing Group, and you can find us at secondhouserv.com and Second House RV on YouTube. And we predict the news for next month. We do geopolitical stuff, you know. It's a busy time in geopolitics, right? So it's kind of it's good to have a heads up of what might be happening next month. We are not 100% accurate because remote viewing is not 100% accurate, but we're a lot better than a coin toss. We also do market forecasts, price forecasts. Again, it's not 100% accurate. This is a psychic modality. We're never going to be able to deliver 100% accuracy because it breaks the simulation, but we're certainly better than chance. And so that is the public-facing side of what I do. Privately, I don't do personal stuff, but I do everything else. So what I really like, because my background is in science and engineering and life sciences and that kind of stuff, I really, really like engineering and science type projects, because people who have like the mental language of the concepts are better at remote viewing that kind of stuff. So if you're a subject matter expert, you've got the word for these really specific detailed things. You know, everything fits together. And in remote viewing, we're not usually receiving like English language. We're not channeling or something. You can do that kind of modality, but I don't. Right? The language is the language of the subconscious mind. It's the language of feeling and the language of symbol. And our job as remote viewers is to translate that into the language of the left brain, into the language of language, into English, and sketches and labels and categories and stuff that is useful when you're kind of trying to solve a problem with your intellect. So a concrete example, there is doctors make better medical diagnoses psychically. So you can give people a blind remote viewing target. What is wrong with this patient? Right? And you give it to them and they'll go, okay, I can see a body here, and like the hip area is lighting up pink, and what's in here? And it all looks very red and inflamed. And I don't know, they have an owie is basically what the remote viewer is saying, because they haven't got that medical knowledge. But a doctor can do it. And a doctor has been sat in a room with someone with tuberculosis, and they've been sat in a room with somebody with broken bones and cancer and diabetes and whatever, right? They know what it feels like. They don't just know the label and the clinical presentation and the numbers and stuff. They know what it feels like to interact with that condition and a human being. So when they encounter that feeling in the remote viewing data, they instantly have the label for it. And it's just the same, if you spend all day staring at CAD software because you're designing electronics, you're designing printed circuit boards, or you're writing software or building networks or whatever it is, right? You get the feeling for the concepts that you're working with, not just the intellectual labels. You know the real identity of the thing. So because I got that background in science and engineering and tech, like that's the thing that I love working on the most, is when people are like, my product doesn't work, why not? Or like, what's the timeline for the product? Where's it going to go wrong? Will this tech work? I love doing stuff like that because I can show off and I'm interested in the subject matter. But I also do anything to do with people and psychology and that kind of stuff, because by necessity, through my own journey, I've been forced to become relatively sort of fluent in that area. And I've had to navigate that territory in myself in order to kind of get from where I was to where I am. You got to go pretty deep and interact with some pretty crazy stuff and come out the other end of it sane and grounded. So I'm good in that area. Probably not quite as good as I am at tech, but pretty damn good. So if you want to know, I'm trying to think of an example that is like that I can share, or to make it a bit vague. So, okay, a recent one, somebody was navigating some difficult psychological territory. And they were kind of stuck. They were trying to heal and work on themselves and kind of grow as an individual. They were just stuck. They couldn't see the way forward. Like, how can I feel better than this? How can I overcome whatever it is that's giving me this kind of held back, constricted feeling, right? And so they actually came to me asking about entities and stuff, because, as I said, these things attach to our blind spots. And they were thinking like, oh, maybe this is that kind of phenomena where this is all like just in my blind spot and I can't see it. And, maybe just getting somebody a bit psychic to look at it, who's also a bit Jungian and a bit, I can speak the language of modern psychology and a bit of Jung and a bit of esotericism and whatever. So that was why they'd come to me. And when I looked at it, actually, what I identified was an event in their past where they'd had a particular experience, and that was the pivotal moment where they changed their mind about their outlook on life. And there wasn't anything woo-woo going on here, right? There wasn't entities, there wasn't any kind of there wasn't anything you need a wizard for, right? It was just a normal traumatic time in that person's life And that had been the moment where like something in their head had switched in terms of how they related to their life and their expectations and their beliefs and their self-concept and stuff. And they were just like completely, they had not considered that that was the place to go, right? They'd been looking for solutions in the wrong place. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see this scene, right? Were you ever in that kind of situation? And they were like, oh, whoa, I was. And this is what happened, and blah blah. And you know, it was this whole thing. Holy shit! And it was like that was all I needed, was just to be like, this is where to look, right? So that's an example of how you can use this just as a psychological tool. I don't really do like personal stuff. I'm not a healer or a therapist by training, so I don't work in a like healing. My insurance doesn't cover me to heal you, even if I maybe could, right? Basically, so I don't work in that kind of frame. I'm a problem solver, and I will find information. So if you want to know, I'm going to launch this product, how's the market going to react? Or I'm going to give this presentation, how's the audience going to react? Or I'm thinking of hiring a new CFO. Is this dude a spy? Or is there a conflict of interest? Or is he going to be blackmailed? Or like, so you can apply remote viewing for HR and R&D, right? You can apply remote viewing to all sorts of things. I don't do personal readings so much, really, because like that's 90% counseling and 10% psychic work. I'm not there for it. You know, right. If you're asking a psychic whether you should dump that person, you should dump them. Right? That's simple. Walk away. There you go. That's free.
Yeah, that's good. You were also telling me you have some workshop coming up. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. This is really exciting. There is a wonderful place in the UK called Broughton Sanctuary at the Broughton Hall Estate near Skipton, which is a really like beautiful natural setting on this incredible historical landscape and a wonderful environment. And in that wonderful place, a institution called the Center for Liminal Studies has just launched, which is like a non-university academic research lab, right? So you can do proper good quality scientific research into consciousness and all this transpersonal woo-woo psychic stuff that we've been talking about today. So one of their partners there is the Monroe Institute, who uses like a really smart it's called Monroe Sound System. It's a really clever system of modulating sound, which induces different altered states in the brain. Right? Hemisync's the old one. They have some new tech called Monroe Sound Science, which is absolutely amazing. It is better than Hemisync because it allows you to entrain a wider range of brainwave frequencies. It's really powerful stuff. I've tried it myself. I'm not affiliated, officially with them. So, this is just my opinion as somebody who's used their stuff and attended some of their events. I think it's very cool. It's very powerful. It's a really interesting tool. So the Center of Liminal Studies, in partnership with the Monroe Institute and me, is running a weekend course, which is called, is it called Develop Your Intuition or Hone Your? It's super good, your intuition anyway, right? Because the idea is we're living in this time when AI is kind of replacing everybody's jobs and everybody's worried about, redundancy. And what is it that we have as human beings that cannot be replaced by an AI, right? Mm-hmm. It is our intuition, it's our soul, it's our consciousness, right? Those machines make a good simulacrum of a conscious thing, but they are not conscious or creative in the true sense. Yeah. So the more that we can tap into our intuition and our inner wisdom and access this sort of other planes of existence, reality, the more we can access non-local information, the more AI proof we can be in our careers, right? And it makes life easier, right? If I'm in the shop and my wife wants lunch, but she couldn't decide what she wanted, right? I can easily tell which meal she would like the most. I was at a restaurant with a friend recently, and it was a Chinese restaurant, menus about this thick, so many things. And I need to get home, and I had a train. It was like a 2-hour train journey. And she was being super slow with the menu, like, shall I have this? Are we going to have like 2 starters or whatever? And I'm like, come on, we need to order. Otherwise, it's going to cost me a lot of money when I miss my train. And so I'm like, hey, give me that. And I went and just like tabbed through the menu with my thumb really quickly, shut my eyes, stabbed my finger into the page, and was like, that is what you want. And she looked at it and was like, holy shit, grilled aubergine. That's my favorite. I haven't had that for ages. Oh my God, thank you. Right. Problem solved in like 2 seconds. And you can really do that is a true story, right? You can interact with the world that way, and if you make modest changes to yourself, this is not difficult. You don't have to be special. I wasn't born with these skills, right? You can interact with the world in that kind of synchronistic, magical way, which draws upon your intuition, and it makes life much more fun and much easier and much cooler. So what we're going to do is like a tasting menu, if you like, a selection of different modalities that people can try out and see what they have more or less success with. So we're going to do some remote viewing. We're going to do dowsing, which is using pendulums and dowsing rods and things to find, traditionally it's used to find water under the ground, but people use it to find oil wells, lost jewelry. If you lost your ring out in the field somewhere, you can do all sorts with dowsing. We're going to do some tracking outdoors, maybe weather permitting. And what else? We're doing psychometry, so reading energy from things. And this is going to be supported by Monroe Sound Science. We're going to have an outreach trainer from Monroe Institute there who's going to bring some of their cool audio tech to help people get into altered brainwave states and kind of experiment with how that affects their access to intuition. What else? We're doing some other cool stuff too. I can't even remember. There's so much cool stuff that we're going to do. Anyway, it is going to be great fun. And let me just check the dates here. Okay, so it is June, the evening of June the 3rd. July, I think. Yeah, no, right. It is July the 3rd to July the 5th. So July the 3rd is a Friday, so it's going to be like turn up in the afternoon and kind of get settled in, do a bit of an intro thing, and then leave sometime on the Sunday. So it's 2 nights staying at Broughton Sanctuary. It is going to be amazing fun. And the aim is that you're going to leave with some direct personal experience of accessing non-local information. It's going to be fun. It's going to be lighthearted, and hopefully it's going to give people skills that they can take back to their personal lives, to their professional lives, and live life in a more magical and intuitive and easier and more fun way. So that's the aim. That's where it is when it is. It's going to be great. Please come along. The sign up page is not quite live yet, and it's going live like today or tomorrow. So by the time this podcast is released, it'll be up, and we will put it in the description. Right. So please go look there, learn about the course, and see if you want to come. It'd be great to see you there.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds really cool, really amazing. I have done a few workshops of this kind myself, and it's always an amazing learning opportunity where you meet like-minded people and you take something away from that every time. So it's I hope that people do check it out. All right, David. It was amazing talking to you. Great conversation. We covered a lot of topics, and maybe we'll do that again. Who knows?
Thanks. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Okay. Bye.